to explore the 7 cards of the tarot that outline the path of the seeker. Today's card is one of my favorites. Now, some might recognize this from my video on the Dark Night of the Soul, because the Tower card might as well have that name. This is what happens when we think that the material world is all that matters, and we walk around like zombies, seeking only physical pleasure or material objects. That state of mind is represented by the Devil card that we discussed in the last video about the 7 tarot keys of the path of the seeker. When we are so focused on the material world, we will get hit upside the head with something that wakes us up. Another name for this card could easily be the Awakening. We might look at those who never have these sort of troubles and wonder, why me? Well, in his book on the Kabbalah, teacher Michael Laitman explains, the Creator sends us troubles in order to bring us back to the purpose of creation. Normally, if we are happy, we don't even care if the Creator exists. That is why he sends us troubles, so that we will remember him. If we feel bad, we are compelled to think of the Creator. This is the great wake-up call. The number for this card is 16, which reduces down to 7, hinting that the Chariot card, which has to do with speech, has a meaning associated with this card. Eventually, we will cover each card of the tarot, but for now, I trust you to do your own research on this fascinating tarot card. The Hebrew word associated with this card is peh. Peh represents the duality of grace and sin. Those two qualities equate to the concept of beauty and the beast because the issues of life directed by speech result in one or the other. As I explained when it came to the throat chakra, it is not only what we say aloud that is powerful, but the words that we use within our mind. Our internal chatter has a far more profound effect upon the life we create than what we say to the outer world. Inner and outer speech usually reflect one another. The type of intelligence associated with this card is active or exciting. Here, there is activity and excitement that produces change and transformation. Yet, as many of us know, change is not easy for most people. Facing the unknown and adventure can be scary if you carry a lot of fear. Most prefer to stick to what they do know, even if it brings them pain, because at least it's predictable. And they know the routine so well that there is nothing unpredictable about it. That's why the persona ego structure has to be dismantled before we can see clearly. The lightning bolt is a male symbol. The power is drawn down from above by an imbalance. In some traditions, the lightning bolt fertilizes the water that it strikes, planting seeds that will develop at a later date. Remember what the dung beetle symbolized to ancient Egyptians, which I talked about in the Introduction to Alchemy video? I'll leave a link to that video in the description box below. In this card, the lightning bolt is drawn to resemble the Kabbalah tree of life, representing the 10 emanations of the primordial source, and it's meant to represent a flash of inspiration that breaks down ignorance. The tower itself represents the mental structures we create with our words. Remember the subjective reality video I made? If you don't, I'll put a link to that in the description box below as well. This system of concepts is based entirely on our experiences in the material world. The tower is only an illusion that we have created. Jason Lauderhead explains, you erect the tower in your head when you think of yourself as isolated from everybody and everything that's going on. You have a tendency to pile up a sort of structure of words that make you feel important and builds up the ego. The man and woman are the same two depicted in the Devil card. Here, they fall head first because the relationship between the waking everyday consciousness and the subconscious has been upset. Both of them are clothed, meaning they are wrapped up in the characters that they are playing in the material world, and they are not communicating with one another. They wear red and blue. The everyday waking consciousness of ego, represented by the male, wears mostly red. Red represents the desire nature of humankind. The male figure is also in the shape of the Hebrew letter Ayin. Ayin is the Hebrew letter belonging to the last tarot key we looked at, the Devil card. And this lets you know that the waking consciousness in this card was focused on the perspective represented by that tarot card. The subconscious represented by the female mostly wears blue. Blue is associated with the water and the moon. These two symbols represent the underlying fabric of reality, the primordial essence, out of which everything is made and connected. The only bit of red she wears are her shoes that hint at earthly desires and Malkuth on the Kabbalah tree of life that represents the earth. The woman who represents the subconscious wears the crown because the subconscious often controls a person. This is the knee-jerk reaction that you can't explain but just feel. When the subconscious is denied or ignored, it becomes the shadow. I recently covered that subject in a Traveler's Notes video that I'll attach in the description box below. Notice how the tower also wears a crown? Paul Foster Case explains the crown represents will. This represents the false interpretation that will is personal and can be something set against the impulse originating in the cosmic purpose. Jason Lauderhead explains the crown this way. The crown of the tower represents the materialistic notion that matter and form are the ruling principles of existence. The tower also represents the subconscious, and it's blue. There are 22 lines of bricks in the tower representing the 22 Hebrew letters. The same exact letters that make up the word brick in Hebrew also makes up the word for moon. The moon is a fascinating symbol because it represents the reflection of the divine light as opposed to the light itself. Because we have turned away from the source, or absolute unbounded oneness as Thomas Campbell calls it, we are only aware of its reflection. Our physical moon does not have its own light, but illuminates the night with reflected sunlight. Bricks are also made of clay and are therefore a symbol of Adam and represents human speech. Human speech can only describe the world as it is related to the five senses of the human body, so it is very limited and only capable of describing physical matter reality. There are 22 yods that are floating in the sky, also representing the Hebrew letters. There are 10 that are in the form of the tree of life on the right, and on the left the 12 yods representing the zodiac. The fact that the yods float in the sky represents that the forces they symbolize do not rest on physical foundations, because they are abstract and therefore spiritual in nature. The yods are like seeds straight from the lamp of the hermit being cast down upon the individual to guide him back to the truth. The number for this card is 16, which represents Mars. Mars' seat on the tree of life is severity, which is associated with fear. Mars tears down the outworn structures of thinking. The Hebrew letter for this tarot card key is Peh, which represents the mouth and the power of speech. This is also related to grace and sin, which you could also call Beauty and the Beast. In fact, that classic story is a really good account of a waking conscious mind focused on personal matter reality and a subconscious filled with imagination. Sin, as we have talked about before, is missing the mark. In Hebrew, it's actually an archery term. You aim the arrow of your will at the bullseye. If you miss the mark, it will result in maladjustment, ugliness, and suffering. Grace is hitting the bullseye. The natural result is the manifestation of beauty. Beauty is also connected to imagination, which is a part of the subconscious. That's why imagination, so often dismissed by the intellectual community, is so important in the creative and manifestation processes. Imagination is also stifled in group think situations, which is why groups tend to lack original ideas or concepts. The first thought you might have when looking at this card is that it represents the Tower of Babel. The word babble has come to represent pointless talking in the English language. The idea that this card represents the Tower of Babel, along with everything we have talked about, is something you should meditate on. Paul Foster Case sums up the meaning of this card this way. This picture corresponds to the second stage of spiritual unfoldment, wherein a series of sudden, fitful inspirations leads to that perception that the structure of knowledge built on the foundation of fallacy, of personal separateness, is a tower of false science. At this stage, the advancing seeker for wisdom suffers the destruction of his whole former philosophy, for this tower is built upon the foundation of misapprehension. The whole structure is an elaboration of superficial observation, traditional thought, fake reasoning, and erroneous theory of will. Now it's time to pull out your journal. As you listen to the sound meditation below with Note C, study the Tower Tarot card. When you're finished with the sound meditation, write down any impressions or thoughts that you had during the meditation. Well, our time is over for now. I hope you enjoyed this lesson, and I will see you next week.